Hello, everyone. I'm LeiLani Cauthen, CEO and publisher at Learning Counsel News Media and Research, and also a proud EduJedi. So this is an EduJedi activity event, and we're here to talk about teacher digital learning experience standards. Those are the standards that the EduJedi put out. So we'll be discussing them today from the viewpoint of mixing in digital design elements. So this is something that's kind of hard for a lot of teachers who've been analog for a really long time and maybe doing a little bit of digital, but now all digital. And so they become mixologists of everything. And it's a new world for a lot of people. And the EduJedi sort of laid down a few standards here. So let's start out with introducing our guest for today, Jennifer McCartney, who's the Director of Learning Technology, District Technology Services from St. Vrain Valley, one of our all-time favorites, and EduJedi Night District, right, Jennifer? So I'm going to come back to you in a second and have you do a little intro like we kind of started with before we started. And I'm also going to introduce Dr. Wendy Oliver, who's the Chief Learning Officer from EdisonLearning. I don't see her yet, but I'm assuming she's going to get on here in a second. We also have with us Brady Badjusic, who's the Director of Instruction and Advisement from EdisonLearning, and I think also Laura Grasso, who's an instructional specialist from EdisonLearning. So we're going to start off here with a brief intro from Edison. Brady, are you prepared to do that? Since I don't see Wendy,
Wendy should be in a couple moments.
Okay, all right. So we'll come back to that. So let's go back to Jennifer. Jennifer, you are back in school. So you want to give us a little background on kind of what happened and then where you're at right now before we dig in?
Sure. Yeah, we are back in school full-time, 5 days a week in person this year after, I think we were in person the second half of last year, but only 4 days a week. And we were in a model where we had half of our kids coming, especially at the secondary level, half of our kids coming one day and half the other day. But we've been back since mid-August. We are a school district just north of Denver area. We're the seventh largest in the state. We have 33,000 students spread out across 411 square miles. So it's a very diverse district. We go all the way up into the foothills of Lyons, Colorado, down to the plains, kind of east of 25. We have students in 4 different counties. So some of our challenges just in coming back have really been from our state and county health level, trying to navigate the different requirements from all of those different entities has been challenging, as well as just some of the differing viewpoints and so forth. We do have a mask mandate in school at this time, and we've been managing that okay. I mean, we are certainly struggling with quarantines and things like that as well. But in general, our kids are in school, our kids are learning, and so that's a real celebration for us.
Yeah, huge. And did you lose any kids along the way during the pandemic?
We were down, I believe, a little under 2,000 students from our enrollment from the previous year, and we're up 1,500 this year. So most of our enrollment has come back. We do have a fully online virtual school. Last year, I don't even remember, the numbers vary depending on the week, but that virtual school, which is K through 12, I think was up to about 2,000 students at one point. This year we have right at 600 at the time, at this moment, enrolled in that virtual school. So we do have an option for that as well. But yes, our enrollment is back up close to what it was in 2019-20.
Yeah, that's what we're hearing. That you're doing really well in that regard, because a lot of other schools and districts had a permanent big loss to alternatives. And the other thing that you're doing with an online virtual is what a lot of places are doing. AB1 was passed in California, so every single district has to have that offering. And a lot of other places are that sort of dual rail. Are you getting pressure to have hybrid, which means students have choices in the online side as well as they want to do some things on campus? Are you seeing that mutation?
We're seeing a little bit of that. Last year, and we still have students, for instance, who might be quarantined who are able to dial into their classroom during the day. So we still have a little bit of that hybrid. What we found last year was that that's really challenging for teachers to have some students at home, some students in school. And especially in certain circumstances, we had some, kids, people who'd take vacations and things like that, and or we'd have days where people just didn't feel like coming into school, and that just became challenging for those last minute experiences for teachers. So this year, our administration has really encouraged families who want that online option to consider our virtual school as a possibility. But we are exploring some other ideas. In fact, we're more than exploring. We're piloting, for instance, this year, kind of a tele-learning. So we've learned a lot from the last year. A tele-learning experience where kids could be both virtual. We could have kids present and then also students who are dialing virtually. Because our district is so big, we may have some specialized courses, AP Chinese, for example, that's only offered at one school, but we have students who are interested in taking that at multiple schools. So right now we're exploring and piloting having those kids at other schools being able to dial in and participate with the students that are in person. So some of those tele-learning options that we're hoping to expand specific to classes for which there's a lot of interest, but not enough maybe for a full FTE at every site.
Yeah, and that's the kind of pressure we're seeing from other places where the pandemic sort of taught America that they can have sort of an on-demand lifestyle, and they want the hands-on, and they want to be able to have their kids in science labs and that kind of thing, but they also want a total flexibility and a total personalized pathway. So that they're not wanting all online all the time, although there's a fraction that does. They want to have the choice at anytime, anywhere, right? Kind of a thing, kind of like what you found, and that's hard. So that's kind of what we've been talking about so far, and it'll be a little bit in this conversation. So thank you for the update. Okay, so let's go to Wendy. Wendy, do you want to give us a little intro from that professional grade side and tell us a little bit about Edison?
Sure.
Hi, Wendy.
Hi, thank you so much for having us and letting us be part of this discussion today. EdisonLearning has been around for almost 3 decades, believe it or not. It's hard to believe that online learning has been around that long, offering services to different types of learners who have some very specific needs and working with districts as a partner. We offer approximately 150 courses for students in grades 6 through 12. We also have teachers on staff and work with multiple states with a variety of certifications, obviously in different content areas, but also in different states, depending on where our partner districts are. We also have guidance counselors on staff. That sometimes surprises folks, but when we offer a full body of services, it's so critical that we include those SEL services as well. And I hope today that we can not only speak to how we provide apps within our content, but also the differences of having those commercial grade content pieces and what that looks like with teachers online in the classroom with students. But also, really digging in and looking at data and how that also helps to serve students and the differences in using an app and using that commercial grade content that's developed by professional designers.
Okay, great. And then we'll be seeing a little bit about your system too as we go along for looking at the quality of the UI UX, which is something that's pertinent to this conversation today, to have standards where teachers are more aware of what software should be doing for them to lessen their burden. Okay, so let's dig into the conversation. So this activity is, the background on it is the dictionary and the Apptastic special report, talking about the plethora of apps and digital things and discrete little files percolating around in anybody's software systems, and what teachers do on their own, and then what schools buy from the professional grade side. So let's just sort of look at the actual dictionary and dig into these standards. So The purpose of these standards, and I have that up on the screen right now, if everybody can see it. Let me make it larger in case your eyes are going and it's a small screen. The purpose of them was to have teachers, when they're looking at how they're going to put together the learning digitally, which is pretty much what every school is doing now. They're not doing as much analog distribution of knowledge pieces. Maybe there's some textbooks in play, and Jennifer, I'll have you address that. But most teachers now are using digital, even if they're back in class. So those professional responsibilities are for their composition of instruction, their learning design, and of course the student oversight of all of the traffic that goes on between the teacher and the students, again, regardless of model. So we made sure to include a knowledge object definition in here. The EduJedi did when they wrote this. But the first standard here is, of course, maintaining organized filing structure, tagging, naming of documents, and other discrete pieces of content. So let's look at this from the design point of view. So I want to start the conversation around digital instructional design. What is the teacher's responsibility with, sort of a lens on, being organized? So let's have Jennifer go first and just sort of address that from her viewpoint. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Yeah, that's a really great question. We have all kinds of systems in place that our teachers can choose from to help them organize their learning, or the learning for students. We have of course, our LMS that we use. We have two different, actually. One we use for secondary students and upper elementary, and one for our younger students. Is one way that we do that. We also have a really strong blended cohort. This is probably in year 6 or 7, where we have teachers who are working together as a cohort, building together their structures and their knowledge around blended learning, and sharing that within the building with other teachers to kind of help them structure the way learning looks like and the way that it's organized.
Okay. All right. So I think one of the things we should do is just ask Edison, if you guys want to share what's happening in the professional sphere, Wendy, Laura, or Brady, for that organizational piece, particularly maybe how you're approving, third-party apps coming in.
Yes, I'll hop in and then toss it over to Laura. This is something that we really had to focus on this year. And I just want to reiterate that, even though we're in the commercial space, just like every district out there, all these resources became free. And, we have a staff of teachers, and that staff of teachers became just as excited as teachers in school districts did as well. So a teacher is a teacher at heart no matter what, and they like free resources. And free always means that data is currency. So with that, I asked Laura to really take on the responsibility of helping teachers to really understand that. So Laura, do you want to share how we tackled that?
Sure. Yeah, as Dr. Oliver said, free is not really free when we're talking about student data. That is one of the most important things that we address here at EdisonLearning. We work with so many students that it's so important that we keep their data private and secure. So we use commercial grade software developed by professional designers to teach the standards, as Dr. Oliver mentioned before. What's great about that is that we can control more of this quality. We want to see this quality over quantity. Apps are great, but is the quality always there? Not necessarily. So what we do is we have a rigorous process in which, if any teachers would like to supplement our commercial grade software with an app, they have to seek third-party approval. So what they do is fill out a form, they do their own research, look at what's the intended use, what's the privacy policy, what are the terms of use, and then they submit this. And we'll look at that and say, is this safe? Is this appropriate? Is this necessary? And then either accept or deny based on this. We found this is really a great way to make sure that everything is safe and secure, because the teachers are taking it in their own hands to do the research and see what needs to go into a secure and safe application, but then we can oversee it and make sure that we're protecting our students.
Okay, so I'm going to turn it back then to Jennifer. Jennifer, do you have a similar process for things that go in behind? I think you said you have 2 different LMSs or 3.
We do.
Okay.
Yeah, and actually, I really appreciated, Wendy, what you said, that free isn't necessarily free. That's one thing we really noticed at the very beginning of the pandemic is our teachers and we in our technology department and curriculum departments were just inundated with free offers, which was difficult for some of our teachers to navigate. We've had a process for a while, and I will say that we know that there's a lot of really amazing resources out there, and we don't want to hobble our teachers in finding and using the resources that are appropriate for their students. And we want to make sure that we're doing it in a thoughtful way and in a way that most importantly protects their data. So we do have a process. We also have a form that teachers fill out if there's a particular app or an online resource that they want to use. It asks them to make sure that they look at their privacy policy and the terms of service, and there's some specific questions around that. We have a flow chart because sometimes that can be intimidating for teachers, although we're about in year 4 or 5 of kind of talking about student data privacy. So we have many more people who are comfortable with this, but we still have some that's a challenge to read through those. So we have a flow chart that helps walk teachers through considerations in the student data privacy arena. But we also ask questions like, what will students be creating with this resource? Because we don't want kids to just consume information. We want them to also be creating things and artifacts. We ask if we have any other resources that provide something similar, because while it's great to have 15 different maybe photography apps, for example, or photography kinds of programs, we can't necessarily support those well. So if we already have 1 or 2 or 3, depending on the level, that do something really well, we don't necessarily need 5 or 6 more. So we ask that question as well. And really, we're looking for things that are going to help students investigate and create and produce in authentic context. So we partner really closely with our curriculum department whenever we're looking at particular apps and applications to make sure that it's meeting the vision of what we think technology should bring for students, and isn't, for instance, just a practice app or something like that we can do without an app necessarily for that, or something that's going to have just a small bit of learning involved with it. So yeah, I appreciate that.
Okay, good process. And it is a developing thing as teachers sort of go down the road. They don't like, here's the 50 apps I want all at once. They sort of do that over the course of a whole year normally, because they're building the brick road brick by brick as they go. And and they run into a teacher at lunch hour, says, hey, I'm using this. They're like, I want to do that too. And it's very organic. I feel like it's a constant vigilance position for people like you, Jennifer, this very organic process that's happening. And the other thing is the reason there's responsibilities here and these standards for teachers is because that'll never change. Just coming from the professional software world, I know Edison's going to echo this. Software, just from your updates weekly, pinging your machine and saying, I want to restart, is never ending. And the more apps you have, the more that constant shift and change of tweaking apps, and then new apps come into the fray, and then other ones age out of the fray. It feels like we've entered a world where this landscape's never going to be done. So this constant vigilance responsibility is never going to be over, which is why there's these standards there. So do you want to comment on that, Jennifer? And then I'm going to come back to Wendy and team.
No, absolutely agree that it is an ongoing process, and we learn and evolve as we go, both as individuals, but also as a system.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's probably a lot of sharing now more than ever before too. Good. Okay, so Wendy, what is your comment about that constant vigilance?
Well, and to your point, LeiLani, there's more sharing now than there ever has been. You know, from my former days in a district, there's always that tug of war between IT and curriculum. But what I just heard from Jennifer makes me so excited because, first of all, you know, she said authentic, right? They want to see the teachers implementing authentic assignments with the apps that they're using. And I also wrote down, she said that they partner with curriculum. So I know exactly why you chose her to be on this panel. It's perfect because they're so far ahead of so many districts in that they're working together with curriculum, and she's using the language of, you know, already you're number 3, right, of those higher levels of Blooms and of Webbs. And you have to, in the commercial grade side, the technology and the development, they go hand in hand, and it's iterative because it's embedded within that software. But you don't often see that within a district that's building content for students. It's more that the teachers are kind of isolated, trying to survive, and IT is trying to hold them back and control them because they're just trying to keep up day to day. So I was really excited to hear your comments, Jennifer, and hear how you're working with the teachers in your district. It's even hard in the commercial world when you have a staff of teachers, which is who Brady oversees. And then I also oversee the staff of developers and then the IT staff for implementation with clients. That's even a challenge to keep them on the same page. And we're not in multiple buildings also serving students with every single division. So I think you nailed it, LeiLani, that it's a constant cycle and it's moving forward. I'm just excited to hear the comments.
Okay, good. All right. So going on to this next responsibility, curating and using knowledge objects with quality aligned to academic standards or goals. This is a place where a lot of early tech transition falls down by teachers. They get interested in sort of widgety apps that are interesting and cute, but not necessarily going to do anything academically aligned to standards. So Jennifer, coming back to you on your comments in that area.
Yeah, I like the word widgety. I wrote that down. That's a good one. Widgety apps. And yeah, back to what you were saying too, Wendy, that that partnership between our technology department and curriculum has really been an intentional partnership over the past 7 years that I've been here with the district. We worked in under the same assistant superintendent for a while and have employees that cross over between both departments. Our IT department is involved in every curriculum adoption that we have. And our curriculum department is just fantastic. When we have requests that come through for any kind of app or resource that is curricular based, it immediately goes to our curriculum department to ask their thoughts on this. And they as well are looking at not the widgety apps, but whether it supports the standards that we have in place, as well as what we want students to be doing. So yeah, I think that is a really important partnership, and it has to be intentional. Do we still have some teachers out there who may have found and are using a widgety app? Possibly, especially if it's online and not something that we manage with our MDM. But over the years, I think that our philosophy, everything that we do with our apps and things like that, and the programs are either aligned to curriculum or meet the vision of our technology plan, which is again that we want students to investigate, communicate, model, and so forth in authentic context. So everything we look at, the apps that we choose, everything is we look at through that particular lens.
Okay. And then do you also have your own SSO, or do you put everything behind your LMSs or single sign-on?
We have some that are our own SSO. We just switched over the summer to a new rostering SSO provider. So that's where most of our SSO is, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's been huge.
So that construct, given that you have your own SSO and then you have multiple LMSs and then you've got apps, I'm sort of picturing the landscape for you. Well, contrasting that with the commercial side, And I'm only bringing this up again because unlike your district, Jennifer, a lot of districts who will be viewing this of our 315,000 readers, once we kick it out, thousands of people watch it at weird times of the day, like midnight, you know, because schools are so busy today. The commercial side is doing it a bit differently, and that's relevant because that's what other schools are competing with. They're competing with massive loss to, you know, commercial learning, homeschooling sites, e-learning companies like Edison and many, many others. So I want to kind of spotlight on how that's done and why it's done the way that it's done. But Edison, who wants to go on that or share screen or talking about the UI UX from the viewpoint of that responsibility of execution commercially?
Yeah, so I'll share on the commercial side, we always make an effort to do single sign-on with any additional or outside providers that we include within the commercial grade content. Honestly, it's because a lot of user feedback that we've experienced in the past is that the students don't like signing in and out of multiple platforms, right? It makes it a much more challenging experience for them. So we will roster in or single sign-on into different applications. And so, Brady, I think you're going to show an example of that. While he pulls that up, LeiLani, I was going to ask your thoughts.
Want me to give you a screen, Brady? I'll stop sharing.
I
Okay.
was going to ask your thoughts, LeiLani, on adding learning targets to that definition number 2.
Is that, do you think that that's fundamentally a different terminology use than goals?
Well, I do, because it's in student-friendly language as opposed to in the teacher's language.
Okay, I got it. I'll do that. We'll put that into the edit. Go ahead.
Yeah, so here you can see we have Discovery Ed. That's one of our apps or outside providers that we get a lot of videos from, educational videos. You may be familiar with those, Discovery Ed. But once that instructional video comes up in the course, it opens up in the course. On occasion, we'll have it pop up in a new tab, but the students aren't signing in, you know, through their own account. Everything opens up, you know, through that single sign-on application, and that really just enables them to be in one program, and that provides that quality user experience instead of trying to log in, trying to find a password, and being, you know, out of the system and you know, not knowing what to do.
So I think what's different about this too, and I'll come back to Jennifer to talk about how her systems work, because schools really like that continuity of process for students. It's sort of a teacher responsibility, because like we found the number of teachers per our big national survey saying they're overwhelmed with the bits and pieces of digital traffic is because you have to back out of one system and click on something else that then, so for example, you've got an embed you're showing. This is embed, right? And it's embedded obviously with a universal gate to the discovery system, which means it's a prepaid gate. But it's embed, which means it's within the workflow. So instead of being an instruction in the LMS that says now go back out of the LMS and now go over into your SSO window and log in over here, your SSO is already going to get you logged in. But it's still a process shift out of one system into another. This is an embed in the same system, is what you're saying.
Yeah, and it's pretty seamless. So the student travels from one learning object into this next learning object, and it does it for them. They don't have to go to that single sign-on where it will sign on them into the discovery platform. It just loads the page that they need to be on for them. It opens up, they're there, and then they can hit the check mark and go into the next learning object. And it's a smooth transition from one object to another, which the students enjoy.
Yeah, that's awesome. So this is really the conversation around these standards, which is, you have a responsibility as a teacher to think about the transitions that a student has to go through. And as they're maybe reading an instruction in an LMS, they're thinking about, okay, I got to go do something else. Now they're in a little navigational journey, even though it's in your SSO, to move out of one object and into another object and then find the right item. That's really what we're talking about on this. So any comments, Jennifer?
No, I think I did want to just say that I agree that smooth transition is really important, mostly to maximize the learning time. We see this at their elementary, or especially our primary grades, especially our kinder and first, making sure that kids, once they get into that first system, and our rostering SSO system actually allows us to use some little cards, QR codes for the little ones to log in automatically, and then being able to easily transition into other systems is really key. At the same time, we know, our teachers know that learning to log in and navigate various systems is a life skill that we need to be teaching, but that can be happening at the same time that kids are able to transition seamlessly through some of these resources.
Okay. Yeah, it's an interesting time because we suddenly have to have everybody have digital agency. It's like, oh, I'm doing what? Where am I? What's a tab? What is a window? There's a lot of little things going on. All right, so I want to move into another. I'm going to skip over a couple of these. I hope you guys don't mind because we had another discussion with others on some of these already. And this focus is on the composition side, the teacher's digital mixology. So I think we talked a little bit about number 7 already, which is ensuring planning, including digital content systems that enhance aspects of student thinking, analyzing, and creativity. But, Jennifer, you mentioned that, but you didn't really build out the meaningfulness behind it, like how. Like, are you using digital comic book apps where kids can build their own proof through a comic book kind of a thing? Or what are you thinking with in terms of the things that are important when you're choosing apps or you're choosing how students use proof that are enhancing those aspects, student thinking, analyzing, creativity? Do you have any comments you want to make about that?
Do you mean how are we making sure that the things that we choose allow students to showcase their learning in these ways? Yeah, it's a great question. Our math coordinator wrote a couple of years ago, the only app that you need for mathematics was Explain Everything. And I love that blog that he wrote. I think that we're looking for things, and we at each of those levels when we're looking for apps. So we're a one-to-one district with iPads from K through 12 now after the pandemic, but we also have other devices in our schools, both Windows and Macs and Chromebooks, as well as robotics and other kinds of devices. So we have our environment, our ecosystem is pretty broad, but the one-to-one device is an iPad. So when we're looking at apps, whether web-based or actual Apple apps that we install, we're looking at, are there things kids can create in comics or drawings or photography or slideshows or text, all kinds of anything where they could create and showcase their learning, right? Or anything that allows them to explore. So we have lots of coding apps and things like that as well.
Okay. Awesome. So that's then we need to leave this standard in there because obviously it's going to speak to people the same way that you're just speaking now about how you guys do it. I want to go back to Edison and how the commercial side actually does this. Like how does it help students, show their thinking, analyzing, their creativity? What does a commercial grade software side do? I think that's you, Brady, right? I'm gonna call him Brady.
Yeah. So for me, with our curriculum, we have a lot of projects in there. So there's a lot of analysis, a lot of creativity for the various projects. I'm trying to find one right now. But throughout the various courses, we have project-based courses. So there are things that they have to do outside the system, such as like reach out to a representative and do an interview with a local historian or somebody in their local town. So we have a lot of these projects that are built into the curriculum that challenge the students to use those skills, to analyze a reading from one of the poems or stories that they read. So we have those built-in projects, and they are using the digital technology to create a presentation, to do a spoken word poem and record that and provide that as their project to the teacher to grade.
I think
So
that's
first to you, and then back to Jennifer. Then what and Wendy, we are easily seeing a big shift from the analog days of turn in your essay, right? Or come up to the board and show me your proof for math. Science, there's a lot of hands-on, you got to complete the experience. Into the digital realm, there's lots of ways that students can demonstrate. And even within the same sort of project, different students could do it differently. Maybe one wants to record a video, one wants to make a comic book, one wants to do a PowerPoint, one wants to do something else. So I know you guys can do this commercially, but I want to come back to Jennifer too. I think Wendy, though, you piped up first. Wendy, what did you want to say?
Well, I was just going to say, I think it's huge that number 7, because a lot of commercial providers have been criticized for just having multiple choice, true, false, things that are auto-graded, for example, within the platform. And without some pretty sophisticated thought, those types of items tend to be lower level as far as what they require the student to do from thought process. And so oftentimes you find that students are just clicking their way through those courses. And particularly with what we experienced last year, and with parents having so much visibility into systems and so many more students using online learning, we're finding that educators and parents and students are saying, we want this to be more like the classroom, right? We want this to have higher order thinking in it. And I think that's a key differentiator in these problem-based learning classes that we have. And it makes a significant difference because we want to engage students. We want them to think learning's fun. We don't want them just poking a button, because how boring can that be?
Yeah.
So it's fun stuff.
Yeah, I would say that that's a new tangent that the commercial side has just taken since the pandemic, where they've realized that that's one of the things that made online learning sort of fall apart for a lot of students, because it was remedial. It was non-engaging from the viewpoint of the student, and then showing some sort of proof of having had learned something. So Jennifer, what are your comments on that?
As you were talking, LeiLani, I was thinking about workflow, and that is a challenge for teachers and students in getting work in and out of systems, especially if kids are showing their learning in a variety of ways. So that is something when we're looking at curricular resources or apps, one of the questions that we have that we evaluate, we have a rubric that we kind of look at, is how do students get work in and out? How do teachers get work in and out to share that? Before the pandemic, we've had our LMS is Schoology for our secondary students, 4th and up. And we've had that for a few years, and most of our schools and teachers were using it. Once we hit the pandemic and everyone was learning from home, we realized that we needed to be thinking as a system. It could be very disheartening and confusing for families who may have kids in different schools or different classrooms who might be using different systems to get work in and out. So our district leadership was really very intentional back in the spring of 2020 to bring some of these things in and work more as a system, thinking in terms of just helping families especially get work in and out. So workflow is a big part of this digital space.
Yeah, and I think probably the hidden hardest part, I'm so glad you brought it up, because when it comes to the teacher's responsibility, there's such a difference between when you're physically together and you wrote on the board before people left, whiteboard or blackboard, right? Here's your chapter for the evening that you got to study. Now there's a lot of traffic, especially in a simultaneous classroom or an online, that's digitally distributed to all. And then there's a backwash of information coming at the teacher that has to all be individually open and closed versus just kids walk in and they put their essay on the desk. It's a very different flow, and it's actually more work than it used to be. And it has to be observed. All right, good. So let's move on to these other ones that have to do with this focus on how a teacher is mixing all their stuff together. So here's one that I really want to talk about. These two, 9 and 10, are important. Chunking or partitioning content aimed at the short form reading style. Okay, let me just qualify that. We all know that that kids have their attention now here since they're 2 years old on their phones. And the style of communication relay here is visual or short text. I mean, even words are shortened in texting, right? Visual plus audio and short form. So this is created a friction, right? We've talked about this. We've created friction where if it's taking too long, if it's longer than a 2-minute video, 5-minute video, or if the text is too long, we have mental checkout from students. Now we need to actually cause them to understand and accept and be comfortable in long form learning. But the fact is that a lot of execution of learning that in a lot of subjects could and maybe should be mostly short form. So this is up for debate, right? So Jennifer, you first in terms of that composition within systems.
Oh, that's a great question. I do hear from our teachers when we meet with them that this is a challenge. This short form, I think, is what you talked about, of learning, of chunking things. I don't know that we systematically are looking at that right now. I think that our teachers are working kind of individually on helping kids because it is up for debate. I don't know that I have a firm opinion one way or the other. We have the way that we receive information as adults even has changed, and the way we think about information has changed. My hunch is, and I have nothing to back this up, is that there is some value though in the long focused kind of attention that we can place on things. And I know that there's some researchers out there that have done some work on this. Where that lives in a digital space or how that lives in a digital space, I honestly don't know. It's a great question.
Yeah, and I've had conversations now with like Southern Oregon where he was on one of the EduJedi activity events. He said, you still have to teach the long form. You have to teach respect for it and willingness for it. It's my understanding, though, that the commercial side largely executes chunks. So piece fits the screen. It's either a short video, short text, illustrated, and then it moves on to the next piece. So it uses the less friction of acceptability to the current youth by chunking more than do traditional schools. Not that we don't need to force some long form, but that's what the commercial side mostly does. So Wendy, do you want to address that, or Brady or Laura?
Yeah, I would say when you think of how the commercial side designs, you have to remember that the style sheets that we use and everything we're also designing for mobile. And so, so it also has to fit on this device, and it has to be scalable. And that's just part of design and return on investment. You don't do two separate courses, one for the phone and one for the computer or the iPad. And so, oftentimes I've had people joke with me and say, so when do you want me to write in tweets? Right? And I say, well, essentially, yes, I do. Because you read very differently digitally than you do on paper. You read top to bottom as opposed to left to right. And because digital literacy is very different than traditional literacy, you have to design it differently. So I would agree that they're different, the short and long form, and you have to design them differently. It doesn't mean that one's better than the other, but you have to train yourself differently depending on which one you're using.
Okay, good. Yeah, so I think that this needs to stay in here as a standard, and it probably needs to be explained more. What do we mean by short form? What are the questions of retention of some long form, some sort of inference that this is a question that all schools and administrative leaders need to address with teachers as a standard, because where you could chunk, maybe you should. But you should also be aware that there's maybe places where you definitely should force long form because of the continuity of the concept. Like, it's going to be pretty hard to describe all the permutations of understanding the Civil War in a chunk, one chunk or two chunks, right? And it has all these legs, so it maybe needs to be a whole thing. Okay, so I think any other comments, Jennifer? Any comments there?
No, I agree with you.
Okay, so we'll put that in. And then partitioning is number 10. Awareness of partitioning and revolving back to earlier misunderstood content. So this is the auto remediation built in. So as you construct a lesson as a teacher, you're aware of how you partitioned and what the concepts were that were supposed to be being learned at each partition, and how you could revolve back or remediate back on misunderstanding, so you can more easily spot what was missed. So this is a concept of instructional design that a lot of teachers haven't been taught, but it is a new responsibility now that they're putting that into their LMSs or wherever they're putting it, that partitioning and being able to know what they were trying to do with each part. So Jennifer, why don't you go first with comments on that?
Yeah. I think I'm wondering about the earlier misunderstood content. I think there's a need to revolve back and reiterate and practice recall just as a matter as part of learning, right? It doesn't necessarily need to just revolve back for something that's misunderstood. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we'll correct that number 10. I need to, we'll edit that then.
Well, I think
Okay, so
there are two
go
things,
ahead.
LeiLani. So what Jennifer described, absolutely. You need to reteach and recall and spread things out periodically, right? That's spacing, that's learning theory. So Jennifer's spot on that. But then there's also, especially as we look at artificial intelligence, there is that need to partition that content and reteach what the student missed. So I think maybe it's an additional definition, what Jennifer's describing. It's interleaving and spacing from where you, like maybe I taught something on Wednesday, right? And then I'm going to bring it up again on Monday just to skip a few days and then to bring it up again to make sure that the child remembers it. And that's how you get it into long-term memory. So I think they're both very relevant.
Well, I'm going to call on you to write me that one or two sentences.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. All right. So let me see what else we have here that we probably want to bring up. We have just 10 minutes left. We talked about proofs, which is the last one. So we'll go back to number 12. We talked about that pretty much, but just from a different angle. So the true personalized workflow, that's something that we see because it is a competitive move. But not every school is moving away from whole group. They're getting pulled in that direction to move towards what the Learning Council calls true hybrid logistics with Uberizing for every student. But they still know they got to try to personalize. So I'm going to come back to you, Jennifer, on that attempt to personalize workflow by the teachers and how they mix in all their digital stuff. Have you seen that attempt, or how are you guys addressing that?
Yeah, definitely. I see the attempt. I think our work in blended learning that's part of this as well, is how do we personalize this for students? It's certainly a challenge. And I think too, at least among our teachers and maybe even among school leaders, there's still maybe not a common understanding of what we mean by personalized learning, right? So that's another challenge.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, these are the new challenges on the landscape now. Like, because the pandemic, and I haven't shown you, Jennifer, the new stats of what happened on the commercial side, but the app purchase by parents during the early part of the pandemic just went off the charts.
Mm.
And so you have a huge volume of Americans that were introduced to the commercial side of learning digitally, not necessarily online schools, just straight up app learning. And that's a new world that's now causing these expectations of personalization that's almost game-like. Like, what game level of, language learning are you on? It's a different kind of expectation that is so not whole group and so not somebody in the front of the classroom while we all do everything at the same pace together. It's a very different world, and it's having repercussions is, I think, the point of this. So not like you have to be exactly that way, but what are you doing to try to make sure you work that in, kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so coming back to Edison team on that true personalized, can you show what your system is doing to do that personalized workflow? Can you guys do that? Can I give you the screen to somebody? I'm going to stop sharing. Brady, do you want a demo?
Yeah, I'll demo.
Okay.
Yeah, for us, we have various learning objects for every lesson. Now, not all the students will see those lesson objects. They have access to them, but if they go through the lesson the first time and get 100%, for example, they may not get into the reteaching page. They may not, delve into that information or those common mistakes. If we're looking or talking about algebra, I have world geography up right now, they might not see that page or may not need to see that page because they've understood the concepts that are covered in that lesson and can move on to the next lesson since they've shown mastery. If we go back to the course map and we look at a lesson 2 here, in this example, they've went through all of the lesson objects, this student in particular. So they have the ability to go into those various parts depending on how they score or if they want to explore more on that concept, especially in the extension. Another thing that we have focused on is the lesson assessments, right? They have multiple attempts. So if a student wants to go in and learn more and get a better understanding, why not give them another opportunity to show that they've mastered that concept or have an understanding of that concept and improve their score. So that's something that we focused on with the rest of our assessments, is to give those additional opportunities, right? If you take the test the first time and you don't do well, but the student's very confident, say, hey, I wasn't feeling well that day. I know this stuff. I want to show that I know this concept, or I can improve upon what I did for that paper. So we allow them the opportunity to go in and make those adjustments, make those corrections, and show growth within those areas that they were focused on within our platform. So it really allows that personalized touch to their learning.
Right. And additionally, since it's automated, it frees up our teachers to really focus on feedback assessment. So issues they miss, questions they're struggling with, the teacher can really put a lot of time into feedback and scaffolding, going back and forth with that student.
Cool. All right. So I'm going to go back to the final points here. So what I'm seeing when you guys were sharing is a pre-build for branching. And I don't know how many teachers in America had time, as they all went digital, to do anything other than the main path. The branching into reteachables is maybe conceptualized by many teachers as additional resources only, but not like another path, so to speak. Jennifer, do you want to comment on that? What are you experiencing in that area?
I think you're right. I think that for a teacher feels like a really heavy lift. And I think that's one place where, one of many places, but one place where tech has really helped teachers to do that because of AI, because it's self-paced, because there are different paths, as you put it, or branches to explore material on an individual basis. I mean, that would be something that would be just really difficult for a teacher to do on their own in an analog kind of world. That differentiation, right? So yeah, I think that's a place that, and I see too more of our vendor partners thinking about learning in this way. I remember 6 years ago, a lot of our digital curriculum was an enhancement, right? It was a textbook in a digital form with maybe a few enhancements, videos embedded and so forth. It's come a long way since then. I think that we can continue to grow in that area, but that's a place where there's a lot of promise.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's also something that can be built over time. You know, like, yeah, I scrambled. I did everything over the summer. I barely got any sleep. I got all my lessons built, right, or whatever. And now you want me to do branching, blah, 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 for kids that maybe didn't get this, and I got to do. This is hard. I mean, it's also a lot of overtime that people don't want. Maybe the district doesn't want to pay for, but it is what it is, right? So the pressure to personalize, I don't think is going to go away since the start of the pandemic. It just went off the Richter scale. And so there's going to be pressure on all schools to start thinking that way. So I think we leave that in here as standard, that teachers should try to work towards. And Wendy, maybe we start including the word reteaching, some other language in there about how we communicate the fact that you need branching. You need to think about students who didn't get this, they're probably going to need this. And teachers do that. This is why teachers are so great, right? This is why we don't want to lose the human interaction, because they can spot it. If they're in a live environment, they typically can see, oh my gosh, I just realized you don't know what a denominator is. You don't understand the little line. I need to have you understand that, and then you're going to get all the rest, right? They can do that, right? But they don't necessarily build that if they're the one building the digital system, right? They're trying to still do it together, analog, right? Okay. So this was good. Thank you for the comments, Jennifer, and thank you, Brady, Laura, and Wendy. What are your final thoughts on this whole conversation about mixing digital design elements as moving teachers towards more standards? Jennifer, you want to go first?
Final thoughts.
Yeah.
I think our teachers have been moving in this direction for a while. I think the past year and a half, it continues to be a challenge, but I see teachers and families and administrators rethinking the way that education and learning can look in these spaces, and I think that's super exciting.
Good. Yeah, isn't it fun to have something like, hey, it's been really bad, but you know what? We also have such a bright future. It's so awesome. Yeah. All right, so good. So Wendy, final comments.
I would just say that you all reminded me of a memory that I have not thought of for a very long time, which was when I was in the classroom, speaking of analog and branching, I created using PowerPoint my own branching for intervention for students. And I could never remember what went where and down each pathway. So it is very challenging work. And I am so thankful that there are software programs that do it now. You know, the other thing I will say on a serious note is I think what I like about the commercial grade is that the teachers can see the data behind all of the components grouped together. Whereas when you're using 6 or 7 different apps, you can't necessarily see all of that data combined, and that makes it difficult. And you want to be able to see the child holistically so that you can make the appropriate personalized learning recommendations for that child.
True. That's another whole conversation we need to have. Data literacy, data use, data-driven decision-making. That's awesome. Sorry, I'm not going to get you, Laura and Brady, but we're at the top of the hour now, so we want to thank everybody for attending. And we'll hopefully see you next time. The next EduJedi activity is learner digital learning standards. And the first part of that discussion is about learners being autonomous. Student agency. Really hot topic right now. So thanks again, Jennifer, so much. You'll have to say hi to Kale for us. And you know, totally in love with all of St. Vrain people. You guys are awesome. You're running an awesome district. You're doing things good, right, and good. And then Wendy and Laura and Brady, thank you guys so much for sharing. It's always good to have the balance, what's happening on the other side. Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. Goodbye for now.